All right, well, you've heard a host of information about the challenges facing new technologies. It's time for questions and answers, and it looks like, please do state your name and remind us where you're from.
Hi, I'm Brad Berman from hybridcars.com. Bill said this morning that you had done research about basically disposable lithium batteries, just like not worrying about the life, right? Not worrying about go ahead and ramping up the full state of charge and fully discharge.
Sure, and these are some slides, again, in the name of expediency. I skipped over, but I'm happy to talk about it now. We can post this paper on the website as well. One of the findings is that, at least for some chemistries now, the state of charge swing is not that important. What determines the rate of degradation of these new lithium-ion batteries is simply the moles of lithium, the number of lithium ions that are over the course of the lifetime of that battery processed by the electrodes. So it doesn't matter if your state of charge swing is very shallow or if you go 100%, 0%, 100%, 0%. It's all about the watt hours or amp hours that you process. So this shows, or this implies then, that it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter how big the battery pack is as long as it doesn't overheat because of power needs. What it shows us is that we could, in principle, design smaller batteries and use more of them without having an increase in degradation per unit watt hour used, right? That's the finding. That's it's a study done at a cell level. It's a compelling result, and it's published now, so I'm happy to share it with you. And I find it to be very promising news because there are different ways to engineer, I believe, some of these outcomes.
It's not a matter of replacing the battery, like not caring about how quickly.
Right. Well, it might age faster if you do a smaller pack, right? But you can get away with it. You can carry less mass, and the problem is that before, the conventional thinking is that if you take a cell through 100% state of charge swing, it will decay very rapidly, much more rapidly than if you did a 50% state of charge swing, right? This finding shows that that's not the case. So we can have one that will last much longer, and because we can use the whole battery, we can afford to replace it earlier, right? And that's sort of what Bill's getting at, I think.
Stuart Brown, Scientific American. How many lithium-ion battery producers are there, and is it genuinely competitive?
It's very competitive, and there are two classes of lithium-ion battery producers. There are those who actually produce lithium-ion batteries, and there are maybe 5 or 10 at best. I mean, the big players, LG Chem, Sony, Sanyo, Panasonic maybe, and there's different acquisitions going on between the two. And then maybe A123 Systems might be moving in that territory. They're starting to produce it at a large quantity. And then there are just a tremendous number of startups. It's silly how many startups there are. And most of them really don't, I don't think, the capital intensity, the amount of money associated with starting an actual battery manufacturing facility is enormous. And yeah. I mean, they have made that jump through a huge amount of government support, and it's unclear, A, if their current trajectory is actually sustainable or not. I'm not sure. And it's unclear how many other large companies are going to be able to raise that kind of capital, at least in the United States, to also make that jump. There's BYD in China. They're heavily subsidized by the Chinese government, and they are making a lot of good batteries as well. They also have some amazing claims about $100 per kilowatt hour batteries that I have trouble understanding how, but if China if their government wants to subsidize to that level, that's something that we have to consider. It's a big deal.
Jim Hall, there was a question here between something that Jay said and something that Robert said about, Robert, you said that algae takes vast quantities of water, and Jay mentioned how little water it needed to make.
It's actually jam.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is, other than having a Spartan knife fight with groin rules, who's right?
My statement had to do with the relative consumption of water versus ethanol, corn ethanol, which is the road we started down. And it's just massive and huge, and we just don't have it. Now, algae takes some water, obviously. You saw the reactors. But numerically, it's the ethanol is just a water hog.
Well, I'll just add, if you're going to produce a large quantity in barrels of oil equivalent from algae, you're going to have massive ponds. I mean, you're going to have, or reactors or whatever. There's just, you're going to use a lot of water. Now, some of that water you may be able to reuse, but it's not insignificant. But part of my the issue with algae that I keep coming back to is you want a photosynthetic process. That's because you don't want to have to feed it. And that's the problem where with a lot of these algae companies, there's one called Solazyme that's based here in California, and they brew algae. I mean, right, they throw food in there. And I'm thinking, okay, well, how is this different from ethanol? I mean, this is crazy. And they're feeding, potato starch or sugar or something else. I'm thinking, the objective here is to separate our food production from our energy production. And so I don't know what synthetic genomics process is. There's a lot of hype associated with what they're doing, and it may well be right. But a lot of this algae stuff is, there's a lot of promise and not much result.
This is a classic example when you're throwing food in an algae pond. If you just submitted yourself to the unaccustomed torture of a life cycle analysis, you would never do that. It's ridiculous. And then the terms of water use that Robert and I are talking about, mine is consumptive. In other words, it's gone. And with algae, you can reclaim some of it. So the numbers are quite different, but they're huge in either event.
Jen, what about this company that's now claiming they can produce algae in the dark without the photosynthetic process?
I mean, come on. Where do those photons, those black photons, where do they come from?
Dark matter and dark energy.
There you go, and black holes. Yep.
Well, just briefly, I've written a lot about corn ethanol and the whole algae thing. The idea of using, in Congress with the corn ethanol mandate, they have mandated that the U.S. burn food to make fuel at a time when there's a growing global demand and in some places a shortage of food and no shortage of motor fuel. I don't use this word very often. It's immoral. It's madness.
And the numbers are big. Yep.
I'm from a Midwestern state, and I know how absurd it is.
Yeah.
But we could get like 118 or 198 a gallon E85 if we wanted it, and the dealers that had it stopped selling it because they just
For sure. Yep. Yep. They just didn't even go through the basics on that one.
As of last year, slightly less than 3% of the U.S. new vehicle market was hybrids, light vehicles, and it was very roughly 1% of global production 13 years after the first hybrid, or 14. I'd like to get each of the three panelists on record as projecting what the percentages will be in 2020 for conventional hybrids and plug-in vehicles aggregated, just percentages of total global production.
Are you going on record?
I just like, this is the first time in the year. I have no idea, and maybe I should go on record there just to do it.
No extra charge.
No extra charge. Free to all. This information is free to all, so get your pencils out. I would say we're going to be in the 5% range, hybrid, maybe a little bit more, and I would say it's 3 to 3. So I think the hybrid market is going to grow, and there will be 2 to 3% PHEV, I suspect. It's going to be still pretty small by 2020. That was the number you wanted, 2020, right? I don't see us, and so I believe we're on the low side of the National Academy of Sciences presumptions. And one of the big questions, and Bill has been talking about, Toyota right now is, from what I can tell, from what they say, is looking at people who now have hybrids are going to now stop buying hybrids and buy the plug-ins. And the question is, will two different markets evolve, or will two different customer types present themselves where we have more hybrid adoption, which I think will happen if the price of gasoline continues to go up or maintain, and whether or not the PHEV folks are only a subset of those or if there's some other differentiator. And I think that's unclear. And so that's one of the biggest unknowns in my mind as far as market growth in this segment.